Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on UAE's exit from OPEC and its impact on global oil prices in India. It is a pleasure to have you all joining us for what promises to be a timely and insightful discussion on one of the most significant developments in contemporary global energy politics. The decision of United Arab Emirates to exit OPEC and OPEC Plus effective May 2026 marks a major turning point in the global energy landscape. As OPEC's third largest producer, UAE departure raises important questions about the future of the cohesion of the organization, the stability of global oil prices, and broader geopolitical shifts taking place within the Gulf region. At the heart of this discussion lies UAE's ambition to significantly expand oil production through Abu Dhabi National Oil Company while reducing the limitations imposed by OPEC production quotas. This move also reflects evolving strategic calculations in the region and changing alignments in the global energy diplomacy. For India, the implications are especially important. As one of the world's largest energy importers, India remains highly sensitive to fluctuations in oil prices and supply chains. India's economy, inflation management, and energy security, and at the same time, the weakening of OPEC's collective influence may also introduce greater volatility and uncertainty into the global energy markets. To help us unpack these complex developments, we are honored to have with us Mr. Amit Bhandari, Senior Fellow Energy Investment and Connectivity Gateway House Mumbai. He's a distinguished expert on global energy market and geopolitics. Mr. Amit has nearly 2 decades of experience as a public policy researcher, an entrepreneur, and a financial analyst. He is author of India and the Changing Geopolitics of Oil, a book that looks at India's changing role in the global oil trade and how it can use this to secure energy supplies. Mr. Amit started his career with Economic Times, where he tracked the energy sector. He also holds Masters in Business Administration from IIM Ahmedabad and the Bachelor's degree in Technology from IIT BHU. We really look forward to hearing his insight on how this development could reshape global oil politics, Gulf geopolitics, and India's strategic energy interests. Sir, thank you so much once again for joining us today. Let me begin with my first question. As someone who is closely observing global energy market, how do you interpret UAE's decision to leave OPEC? And do you see this primarily as an economic decision driven by production ambition, or is it a part of broader geopolitical realignment in the Gulf?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's good to be in conversation with CPPR. Now, let's break the energy picture into two parts. One part is India as a buyer, and second part is the oil supply section. So, India imports about 4.5 to 5 million barrels of oil a day, and we import about 90% of the oil that we consume. And we import about 90% plus of the oil that we consume. So, the price at which we import this oil is really important. Indian economy is driven by consumer spending. If we are buying this oil at $70 versus when we are buying it at $90, that makes a huge difference. So that is the first part. And if you look at it for the last 20, 30, 40 years, any time in history, the price of oil has been one of the major points of concern for India. So that is the first part. Now, from the Indian perspective, the exit of UAE from OPEC is actually, I would say that it marks a positive development. And the reason I say that is because UAE's exit really means it is an indicator of many things. First of all, historically, we have worried about oil supply, whether oil will be available at a good price. What UAE's exit in a way tells us is that the world oil market, notwithstanding the current disruption that we have because of the conflict, is going to be fairly well supplied. That I think is the first and foremost the lesson that we should draw from this. The second part is that if we look at the oil market over the last 15 or 20 years, there have been there are a few important developments I would like to flag off. One is that the US has become a major producer of oil because of shale oil. One. Second, because of this large amount of production from oil, the pricing power that OPEC historically had in case of oil sector has really gone down. So in the last 15 or 20 years, the price of oil has remained in a moderate range. If you look at 2014 onwards, price of oil has generally remained in a moderate range, which has been very comfortable for India. And the third part is that we keep hearing about OPEC production quotas, OPEC production cuts. So these are times when OPEC countries reduce their production as a collective to keep the prices in check, or to keep a floor on the prices. But if you look at this closely, you will realize that just two countries account for these cuts, two or three: Saudi Arabia, UAE, and maybe Kuwait to a smaller extent. So, okay, so now this is important because Saudi Arabia has probably 2 or 3 million barrels per day of spare capacity. And UAE, I think, has maybe 1.5 million barrels of spare oil production capacity. Now, these are not small numbers. When we talk about developing even a small oil field of 1 or 2 million tons a year, it requires maybe a few $1 billion of investment. So when you look at this so-called spare capacity, what it actually means is that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have spent and UAE have spent maybe tens of billions of dollars over the years to keep this, to create this capacity to produce oil, but not use it actually. So for many decades, UAE has been paying this, you could call it a rent or a cost of keeping this spare capacity to keep a check on the market. And I think now UAE sees that there is limited utility of paying that cost. It is better to produce that oil and generate the return from it. So I hope that addresses the first part of the question that you asked me.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But I have a little bit of follow-up question here. You talked about how U.S. gas or shale gas has somehow led to decrease in the dependence on the OPEC as a organization. But at the same time, there is a lot of discussion around that for shale gas to actually utilize it in your vehicles, you need to have that refineries, which the countries don't have right now. You need a lot of investment into it so that to make refineries who can actually refine the shale gas. Because if I am not wrong, shale gas and the crude oil that we get, they're two different things, right? And the crude oil that we get, and most of the countries have the refineries which can refine that crude oil. The capacity to utilize the shale gas, for that we need a lot of investment. And I think that OPEC, I mean, we
Yeah.
could disagree on that, that I think OPEC still has a little bit edge over shale because it is not fully yet utilized on that extent as we have OPEC doing with the oil.
So okay, now that's a fair thing. So shale oil has somewhat different characteristics. It may be easier or difficult to process, which is fine. But what we have to, the important thing to note is if I go back 20, 25 years, uh, global oil refineries were geared in a certain way. Now refineries keep getting upgraded and new refineries are built. Now, if somebody goes to build a refinery today or in the last 10 years, they will build it with the technical complexity that is needed to process difficult crudes. So, Canada has, for example, been a big net addition to the global oil production in the last 20 years. They produce, I think, about 4 or 4.5 million barrels a day. Now, Canadian oil is extremely difficult to process, but if you have a sufficiently technically complex refinery, and examples of that are the Reliance refinery in Jamnagar and the Rosneft refinery also in the same area, and some of the new refineries that have come up in India, they have the technical ability to process that crude. So many of the new refineries that are coming up have the ability to process multiple types of crude, including the hard to process crudes that come from the US, Venezuela, or Canada. Once you have sufficient refineries which can process this kind of a crude, the quality of oil, I wouldn't say ceases to be a factor, but is a much reduced factor. What happens is that because this crude is hard to process, it requires a certain extra cost, it goes for a discount. So when you look at the market cost of Canadian crude versus, or Venezuelan crude versus, let's say, a crude like Brent, which is a light sweet oil from North Europe, there will be a few dollars per barrel of price difference, which in a way accounts for the additional cost that you're incurring in processing that oil. So I would say that in the current scenario, now that there is sufficient refining capacity, it would not be as much of an issue. Uh, and because infrastructure gets built, keeping in mind the kind of oil that has come into the market. So it would be it is primarily now an issue of maybe a cost differential, but not an issue of technical ability.
Okay. Yes, yes, yes. We can. Yes, absolutely. So, do you see this primarily as an economic decision driven by production ambition or as part of broader geopolitical alignment in the Gulf?
So I think it's a bit of both. Now I will focus more on the economic aspects because that's something I'm more comfortable with. So as I said earlier, that 1.5 million barrels of spare capacity is probably 50, 70, or $100 billion of cumulative investment over the decades, and which you are actually not using. And for us, and that's an enormous cost to that country and to that economy. So one, in the long run, it doesn't make sense to keep that capital idle. Two, I think they also see that unlike the past when oil was maybe, if you go back 15 years, oil was at 85, 90, $100 a barrel. So those days at least won't be coming back quickly. We have had the biggest ever disruption in the oil market, and prices have still not touched the kind of historical peaks we have seen in the past. So in the long run, they do not see an oil shortage, and which is why the utility of keeping this unutilized investment is not a good idea. And I think the third part is that, yes, there is definitely a geopolitical aspect to it. The six Gulf monarchies, the GCC bloc, have historically acted in unison on a range of issues. And I think in the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen them fall out on multiple matters. So if you remember in 2018 or 17, there was a break between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. There was a break of diplomatic relations were cut off, and there was some other unpleasantness. In the more recent past, I think earlier this year, we saw about 6 or 7 months back, I think there was a confrontation between Saudi Arabia and UAE on some factions in Yemen. I think Saudi Air Force bombed a faction which was backed by UAE. So these countries clearly don't see as closely, or they are not as closely aligned today as they used to be historically. And I think UAE's exit from OPEC is also a marker of that. So the geopolitical alignment that existed within the GCC is no longer what it used to be.
Yes, yes, yes. I can agree. I agree with that. So now the relation has deteriorated. So that is a very important point, especially considering the uncertainty already present in the global energy markets. Some analysts suggest that the weakening of OPEC could lead to greater oil price volatility or even a possible price war within the Gulf, particularly with the Saudi Arabia. So, how realistic do you think or do you believe these concerns are?
So, okay, one, I would, the price war aspect is something which I think I'm a little iffy about. And the reason I say that is that at the end of the day, oil is really a commodity. Whether you take oil from source A or source B, it has certain technical features, and with a maybe for a differential of dollar, half a dollar, countries are perfectly willing to switch from one oil to another. And we saw an example of that when India started buying a large volume of oil from Russia. We were actually able to convert almost, I think at one time, about 40% of our imports were coming from Russia. So we were able to reach that point. So I would not look at it as a price war. I think that term is probably a little, price war is not the most appropriate term here. I think the term we are looking for is that uh, there is going to be a well-supplied oil market for the foreseeable future, which is the next 25 or 30 years. One, two, just as an oil buyer, we have always been worried about security of supply. If I'm an oil seller, I am worried about security of demand. I am UAE or I'm Saudi Arabia. I have oil for the next 50 or 100 years. I want to know who's going to be the buyer for that duration for me. So if as a seller like UAE, I'm able to get that demand security, maybe through a tie-up with a country like India, then I am in a better position to invest in my risk. Yeah. So I would say that UAE is probably seeking demand security, one. To provide that, to get that demand security, it has to convey to customers like India or China that it is a reliable supplier, it is a long-term supplier, and that they can enter into long-term agreements with it. And I think as a part of that, exiting OPEC also serves as a signal that we are more committed to our customers than we are committed to our partners like OPEC, which seek to maybe keep a cap on a floor on prices or a cap on production. So I think not being a part of a producers cartel sends that signal out. It may also make it easier for UAE to get investment in their oil fields.
Okay. So my next question is, since UAE has heavily invested in expanding Abu Dhabi National Oil Company's production capacity, and it aims to produce more than 5 million barrels per day by 2027. So how could this increased production influence global oil prices and the balance of power within the energy market?
So, okay, now this is a really good question, because let's put it this way, that the price of oil is determined by what is called the cost of the marginal barrel. Marginal barrel is really, how to put it simply, it is the let's say that Saudi Arabia has oil fields which are where it is very easy to produce oil from. Maybe the cost is maybe, let's say, $5 or $10 a barrel, because you just stick a pipe in the ground and oil comes out. Now, obviously, that's not going to be the price of oil. The price of oil will be determined by the point at which the most expensive barrel is being produced and there is a buyer for that barrel. Does that make sense? So at this point of time, maybe that point is around $75 or $80 to a barrel. That at 75 and $80 per barrel price, there is a demand for oil, and there are fields which can produce oil at that price as well. Now, UAE, given its richness in petroleum, I think has a marginal cost which is much lower than the $75 to $80 price. So if UAE is able to invest in its oil fields, expand its production substantially, I think it is going to definitely see a great financial inflow coming into that country. One. Second, I think I think I have overused this term in the last few minutes, that the oil market remains well supplied, but having a large scale producer which is providing this solid supply into the market makes it stronger. I think the companies that are going to be hurt from it will be these marginal barrel suppliers, producers whose cost of production is fairly high and who may not remain viable if the price is a little low or high. So I think this typically will be some of the US less efficient American shale oil producers. So some of these smaller producers or producers who are using who are not a part of the rich oil bearing rocks, those I think will be the ones that will be affected by this. But I would say that as a consumer country for India, I would think that this is a good place to be in, because we import about 5 million barrels of oil a day, and our imports are probably going to reach about 10 million barrels a day by 2050.
So, since you talked about India, from India's perspective, could this particular development strengthen bilateral relations between India and UAE? And what are the opportunities does it create for India's long-term energy security and import diversification strategy?
So, I mean, yes, to be very brief, yes, it definitely is presents an opportunity for India. There are two or three things to sort of parse over here. The first is that I used the term demand security earlier in reference to UAE. So India is going to be one of the very few countries which is going to see an increase in its oil consumption over the next 20 years. Most of the Western world, if you look at European countries or Japan, their oil consumption has been declining for the last 20, 30 years continuously. I think China has reached its peak as well and is not going to see a great increase in its oil consumption. China is the world's largest oil importer. US is a major user, but it does not import so much oil because of shale production. So if I'm an oil supplier, uh, who is it that can guarantee me demand security for the next 20 or 30 years? I think it is India. So to that extent, UAE will seek a deeper partnership with India than what is already there. Now, India-UAE relations are already fairly strong, I would say, at this point of time. We have a trade agreement with them. It is one of our major trading partners. A lot of India's exports go via UAE to other countries, and it is also a major oil supplier. Plus, you have the 2 million plus Indians who work in UAE as well. So I think keeping all these factors into account, India-UAE relations are going to grow further. In what form can they grow? So I think bilateral investment will definitely be one sector. UAE may want to invest in India's downstream oil sector, like refineries and retail networks, because that gives them security of demand, one. Secondly, having a presence in retail, fuel retail helps protect their economy against low price of oil. Uh, Second, investing in non-oil sector in India will help UAE. If I'm an oil exporting country, I want to invest in non-oil sectors to protect against low prices as well. India offers the prime opportunity for that. So I would definitely expect more investments from UAE into India because of A, higher cash flows that the country will have, and B, because of their desire to uh, secure their demand as well. Now, from the Indian side, I think there are a few things we want to have. India historically has, as I have mentioned earlier, India has always been an oil importer. And one of the ways to reduce that vulnerability is to invest in overseas oil fields. And Indian companies started investing in oil fields overseas in early 2000s. But in the last 10 years, this outgoing investment has really taken a backseat. We haven't made any significant investments in the last 8 or 10 years. And I think this is something which could change. India has one investment in the UAE right now in oil fields. And if there are more such opportunities available, India should definitely take them up. While I know I have said this 2 or 3 times already, maybe more, that the oil market is going to be well supplied, but that doesn't mean that it may not have disruptions like what we have seen in the last 3 months. I mean, a conflict or a war or a disaster can easily create can easily cause disruptions, push the prices high. So we should seek to invest in stable countries which are rich in oil, and UAE, I think, is all of them. So I think it's a two-way opportunity. Indian investment in upstream UAE over time and UAE investment in downstream India again over the next few years. And maybe one can be linked to the other. You know, uh, let's say India has, for example, tried to carry out disinvestment in public sector refineries like HPCL and BPCL in the past. So ideally, you could actually sell a stake in HPCL or BPCL to a ADNOC, and in return acquire a stake in ADNOC, uh, a substantial stake, which then gives you a stake in their oil fields as well.
So, beyond economics, this particular issue also has major geopolitical and strategic dimensions for the region as well as for India. So, do you believe that UAE's exit signals a broader transformation in the global energy order, where bilateral strategic partnerships become more influential than traditional multilateral energy groupings like OPEC? And where does India fit in this evolving landscape?
Okay, so I would say that India simply fits in the evolving landscape by being what it is right now. We are the third largest consumer of oil in the world, and we are the second largest importer. And this is something that's going to remain for, and we are the only major economy with a growing demand for oil. And I think this is what makes India important for any oil producer. So that part I think is quite clear. Now the question is that what is India going to do with this increased weight? You have a certain heft in the market. What are you going to do with it? So are we only going to remain buyers of oil as we have always been, or are we also going to become investors? Now, if you are a consumer of oil, you have an interest in ensuring that the oil market is getting plenty of investment. Oil fields are getting plenty of investment so that more oil comes into the market. And I'm sorry to say that we as an economy have never really tried to do that. And this is something we should become more, uh, this is something we need to be more clear about. So India needs to start investing in upstream oil in oil fields. And I think this is our dependence on oil is going to remain. So we have no other option but to make such investments to make sure that our energy prices stay within reasonable limits. So I think Indian role is reasonably clear to that extent that we will be a buyer. We have to recognize that fact and we have to act upon it. Now, as far as the alignments are concerned, I think historically, US has been the major security provider for much of the West Asian region for the last 40, 50 years. If you go back to the 1960s or 70s, what you will find is that the Western world, US and its European allies in Japan, accounted for the bulk of global oil consumption. Now, if you start drawing a oil consumption chart of the last 4 or 5 decades, what you will find is that the weight of Western world in the oil market is reduced substantially. Uh, there was a time when a single country like Belgium or Netherlands consumed more oil than India in the 1960s and 70s. And today, India consumes more oil than Germany, UK, and France combined. So, that's the kind of difference which has taken place. So Europe is and the West is not the biggest factor in the oil market. It is the Asian consumers, one, and Asian consumers also are going to have a growing weightage in the coming years. And I think as a part of this growing economic linkage or this growing weight is also going to ensure that uh, there is a geopolitical realignment in the region.
Talking about geopolitical realignment, so I have just a few more questions. One is, since OPEC is an institution of liberal international order, and there is an ongoing discussion in academia as well as in research about liberal international order is in decline. So, can we situate this particular exit of UAE from OPEC within that context?
I don't think OPEC members can be qualified as liberal democracies or any. They can't really be called liberal countries in that manner. I would somewhat differ in that. I think OPEC is more a relic of the 1970s and 80s of a Eurocentric world, and where demand was largely driven by European consumers and Western consumers. And as that balance has shifted, I think the sort of that was one. And second, of course, it was a relic of the time when actually, if you go back again 20, 30 years, you will find that there was a continuous fear about the world running out of oil. I think till as late as 2007, 8 or so, there were actually fears of peak oil, which is that the global oil production is going to peak and then go into an irreversible decline. So I think OPEC is an artifact of both of those eras, both of those thought processes, a Eurocentric world and peak oil. And peak oil has been discredited because of advances like shale and all. And secondly, I think Europe is no longer the center of the world. So as those realities have shifted, I think the need for OPEC is no longer there.
Okay, so does the possibility of UAE leaving OPEC reflect broader changes in the global order driven by energy transitions and economic diversification?
So yes, I would say so that it reflects a change in the economic center of gravity of the world. The the economic center of gravity at one time used to be between US and Europe, somewhere in the Atlantic. If you do a GDP weighted sort of average of the world as a whole, and I think now that fulcrum is somewhere in Asia because of the rise of China, because of the rising India, and so on. And I think OPEC's developments, whether in the energy markets or elsewhere, are also a reflection of this changed reality.
Okay, so considering UAE's growing ambitions to expand its oil production capacity, diversify its economics beyond hydrocarbons, strengthen its position as a global energy leader, and pursue independent economic and foreign policy objectives, to what extent would a withdrawal from OPEC benefit the UAE, and what would be the potential overall consequences of such a decision for the UAE itself and other, I mean, for UAE itself, other OPEC member states, and the stability of global energy markets?
So, I'll say that let's look at it from a UAE perspective. Now, India has a company called ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation. It's an oil producer. ONGC has a certain capacity for producing oil. Now, let's say that if tomorrow we were told that ONGC can actually produce 20-30% more oil easily, but it is not doing that out of a certain discipline. Uh, would we believe that this is the right course of action for Indian people? Because it's a state-owned company. I think we would find it to be wrong. Now, the same thing applies to UAE. They have the capacity to produce maybe 4.5, 5 million barrels of oil, but they are producing somewhere around 3.2, 3.3 million barrels, right? So that extra, that 20-25% of oil that they are not producing, it is a cost to the citizens of that country. It is a cost to that economy. Now, historically, so this is a price that they have been paying for the last so many years. Now, historically, it was a price worth paying to keep the prices stable and a floor on the market. That's why the cartel existed. But now they are finding that this is a game of diminishing returns. Being a member of OPEC and keeping a production under check does not have the same benefits as it had in the 1970s. And so I think as a result, I think it is no longer viable for them to be a part of this group. And hence they have exited. And I think apart from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and UAE, every other single member of OPEC has historically produced as much oil as it can. So it is really, you are really taking on an extra burden on behalf of others. Uh, and whereas the gain that comes because of the price floor actually is shared amongst everyone. So it's not something which is very helpful to these guys.
So, considering the increasing shifts towards the renewable energy, evolving geopolitical rivalries, and emergence of more multipolar world order, to what extent OPEC maintain its influence over global energy markets, and what challenges and opportunities does this this changing international landscape present for both oil producing nations as well as broader global economy?
So look, I would say that in case of renewable energy, to a certain extent, there is an element of hype. There are certain things that renewable energy cannot do. It is intermittent, one. Uh, Second, when you look at solar power or wind energy, it's really electricity. Electricity is something that we generate from coal, whereas oil is primarily a fuel used for transportation. And over there, electricity has a fairly limited use case. I mean, there are electric vehicles, and they do account for a substantial share of global car sales. But let us remember that they also depend on minerals like lithium, cobalt, rare earths, and all, and for which the supply chains are not entirely secure. So, considering that, I would say that renewable energy renewable energy is not a large scale replacement for oil, not at this point of time. Maybe it will be in 15, 20 years' time. One. So transportation sector is going to remain dependent on oil for a very long time to come. Likewise, India's need for oil for its transport needs is not going to change. Finally, there are certain applications that petroleum products have. Urea fertilizer natural gas is used for production of urea. Petroleum products are used for production of plastics and petrochemicals. Those cases are not going to go away either. So oil has a fairly long run ahead of it still. So I would not dismiss it because of that. And therefore, producers like UAE and Saudi Arabia are going to remain rich countries for a long time. I mean, there may be a dramatic technical change which may prove us all wrong, but then that we can't really forecast from here.
Yes, absolutely. So, in the context of accelerating energy transitions, shifting geopolitical alliances, and growing economic diversification among oil producing states, how might the relevance of organizations like OPEC evolve in the coming decades? And what implications would this have for global energy security and balance of power in the international system?
So look, I would say that OPEC pretty much is done as a grouping. I mean, it exists, but it doesn't really have a market presence any longer. If your key producers who are willing to change the production. So as I think in the beginning we discussed that Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and UAE were the only ones who were able to cut production or increase it on demand or at a short notice. So out of these three, one of them has left. So there are just two. There are just two remaining. So I think to that extent, OPEC's strength, which was already low, is further reduced, and I think over time it's going to erode further. So I would say that that group is over. One. Two, I would say internationally, OPEC used to be a big factor in the 70s, maybe even the 90s and early 2000s, and that's no longer going to be the case. So we will probably see a more uh, historically, I think lower income countries like India used to worry about oil supply. Those kind of worries are gone. So if we see stable energy prices, and if we see stable energy prices, I think that's going to help countries like India grow substantially.
So the last question, as global energy demand patterns changes and major oil producing countries pursue both competition and cooperation in shaping supply, how might the role of OPEC transformation in maintaining market stability, and what could this mean for the future of global economic governance and geopolitical influences?
So, look, I mean, I think my sense is OPEC is no longer, OPEC is going to be less of a factor in maintaining prices than it has historically been one. Two, I think accepting a major war disruption or a disaster, I think energy prices will generally be stable. Uh, Obviously, we could not have foreseen this war. I mean, other than the disruptions like these, I don't think anything untoward is likely to happen in the oil market. And that really means that as long as you are an energy buyer like India, you can be assured of a reasonably good runway in the 10-15 years coming ahead. So that is one. But knowing that you have a clear runway doesn't mean that you just take things for granted. India should still try and invest in making sure that it has access to oil fields. It should try and invest in resources across the world, because as an importer, that is one of the few ways in which you can hedge yourself. So low resource prices should be seen as an opportunity to invest and secure supplies, maybe for an emergency, which we hope we never have to use.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, for such valuable insights and for helping us better understand the strategic, economic, and the geopolitical implications of UAE's exit
Yeah.
from OPEC. So today's discussion highlighted not only on the changing dynamics within the global energy market, but also the growing importance of flexible bilateral partnerships and evolving geopolitical alignments in shaping the future of energy security. On behalf of Center for Public Policy Research, I would like to sincerely thank our distinguished speaker and all the participants who joined us for this engaging session. Thank you once again, and we really look forward to hosting you in our future discussions. Have a wonderful day ahead, sir. And
Thank you.
thank you for joining us in this episode of Global High Tea series. And do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more engaging discussions on evolving geopolitical landscape. Thank you.